What's good, YouTube peeps and barbecue freaks? Thank you guys for stopping by today. Today's video is going to be a really simple, quick video, and it's probably going to be one that many of you are going to benefit from. However, I've been getting questions a lot lately from people who are just starting out when it comes to barbecuing, and really need to learn the basics. I have been asking questions, and one of them has been how to trim ribs. So I got a rack of spare ribs that I'm going to take from spare to St. Louis cut. I'm going to show you how to do that in case you have a rack of spare ribs that you need to trim down. Again, I know many of you aren't going to find this useful. That's fine, I understand. But as my channel is growing, I'm finding that there's a lot of folks that are needing some guidance. And so, if this can help them, let's do it. Anyway, I'll show you the rack of ribs, and we're gonna get these bad boys. We're gonna get this bad boy trimmed up. Let's get started. All right, so what I have here is a full spare of a rack of spare ribs. This one, I don't know if you can make it out, but it's 5.74 pounds. I paid $9.99 for it. So when you buy a whole spare, this is how it's gonna come. It's gonna come with, you have the ribs here, and on this side you have the rib tips. So we're going to cut into this. Get this opened up. These are Smithfield ribs. These are what I like to cook, especially in competitions. Let's get this out. Make sure we get all this in the trash. Right here. And I'm going to take paper towels and pat this dry. Make sure you get it nice and dry. Get that blood off of there. Any blood that's still on there, I want to get that off. So this has a little piece here. It came right off. Good. So this is what the whole spare looks like. I'm not sure they look like they butchered some of this here. So anyway, when you buy spare ribs or a rack of spare ribs, this is what you're getting. Again, you have the rack of ribs here, and on the top end you have your rib tips. These tend to dry out more, so I usually will cut them off and cook those separate. But what you also have on this end, where all this fat is you have this brisket bone. And if you turn it over, you can see it better right here. That you want to make sure you get off, and that's usually what I take off first. So I'll just take a serrated knife here and just get right under that brisket bone. Cut it right off. Some people will, quick second. Some people will just find that fourth bone, which is the highest bone, and just make the cut straight ahead. And sometimes this bone is in the way, sometimes it isn't. I just like to go ahead and cut it off, make that the first thing I do, so I don't have to worry about anything else, or I don't have to worry about it later. So you got that. Okay. I am going to, you know what, we'll come back to that top side. But on this bottom side, you have this flap here that you want to trim off. You can see that. I like to trim it off because what happens is when you leave it on, you season your ribs. As it cooks, this will rise up, and then you get a spot here with no rub on it. So I like to just cut this off. You can actually season this up and throw it on the grill. It makes a really good snack. So you don't have to get rid of it, but I would try to trim off a lot of that silver skin if you're going to use it. I'm not going to use it, so I'm going to get rid of it. And it just kind of exposes these bones more. Just kind of trimming right underneath that where it was. coming in here. Any of this fat you can trim off. I'm gonna cut these rib tips off anyway, so I probably don't need to do this, but if I cook these rib tips, I'm gonna have to trim it off anyway, so I might as well do it now. So just any fat that you see that you don't want on there, cut it right off. So now what we're gonna do to turn this into, so we still have a full spare, right? You know what, we're gonna go ahead and, there's always this one end that has a ton of fat on it. You wanna get rid of that. You do not want anybody to eat all this fat. In fact, I'm actually gonna cut this last rib off, or this first rib off, but you could cut it off ahead of time, or you know, you could do the trimming afterwards. But the reason I'm leaving it on now is because when you flip it back over, you have your ribs here, and you want to count the fourth rib. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. This fourth rib is always the biggest rib, the longest rib. So what you could do is put it up against your cutting board, so that way you make sure you got a straight line. Find the top end of that fourth rib. If you cut this first rib off to take off that fat first, then you're looking for the third rib. But it's always that fourth rib. So I put it up against the cutting board so I can make sure that it's straight. I can see my line, compare the line that I make to the edge of the cutting board to make sure that I got a straight rib. So this is a fourth rib here. I'm gonna come up just about a ½ inch right above it. And I'm just gonna make a thin line. I'm gonna see if I think it's straight enough all the way down. I think it is. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna cut these rib tips right off. But you wanna make sure you make just a small line in case you need to alter it. You don't wanna have to do it after you've already dug into the ribs. Cut off here. So here we have the rib tips separated from the actual rack of ribs itself. So together you have a spare rib, a whole spare rib. But once you remove the rib tips, now you have a St. Louis cut. And then at this point, like I said, I'm gonna just cut this last rib here. I don't know if you can make that out. That's really thin. There's no meat on it. It's all fat. You want to go ahead and cut that off. And actually, it's better if you do it this way because you can actually see the bone. And sometimes this fat runs pretty deep in that you have to cut 2 bones off. This one wasn't the case. And at this point, it's just a matter of cleaning it up. You know, trimming that fat off that you don't want on there. I am going to flip it back over, and on this back side, clean this up a little bit. We want to remove this membrane from the back side. So what you're going to do is just take the tip of your knife, or you use the back end of a spoon or a butter knife, something like that, a fork, and get right under this silver skin. Now keep in mind, you have 2 silver skins, 2 layers. You want to try to split them and not get under that second one. You know you've gone under the second one when you pull it up and the bone is exposed. That's how you know you got into that second silver skin, and that you don't want to do. So now this is going to be pretty slippery, so using a paper towel comes really is really handy, because you can grab this silver skin and pull it right off. Let me get a closer shot of this so you can see what I'm talking about, that second layer. So if you look here, you can see that second silver skin underneath that first one. That one you want to leave off. If you got under that, what would happen is you'd expose that bone more. You don't want to see that bone, because what's going to happen is when you cook it, that's going to fall right out. So that's how you could tell that you didn't go too deep. That's what the second silver skin looks like. That one isn't as tough as the first one. The first one will not let smoke or seasoning penetrate the ribs. Now at this point, it's just a matter of cleaning it up. Sometimes there's some pretty big fat pockets underneath that silver skin. You want to go ahead and remove those. You don't want someone to bite into that as they're eating the rib. This one isn't overly bad. Sometimes it's got some pretty fat pockets. Get some of that off. And you can just clean it up, you know, however much you like. Or not, leave it alone. It's up to you. But that's pretty much it. Actually, these bottom ribs, sometimes the bottom part is really thin. If you look at that, there's really just cartilage in here, not bone. I like to go ahead and cut that off. So what I'll do is just take it, find a piece of cartilage, and actually you can count about 10, 11 bones. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right there. Yep. Went right through that. You can season that up and throw it on, but I'm not going to. So, and actually you can save this for a pork stock, which I do often. I have a bunch of this already, so I don't need any more right now. And that's pretty much it. Here's your rib tips. You can see there's not a ton of fat on these, so these tend to dry out more. What I like to do is, I love eating the rib tips. They're little nuggets of pork goodness, but I like to just kind of square it off. Flip this side over. We're going to cut this. This is where that cartilage is. Cut that right off. And that's it. I mean, you got a nice little rack here of rib tips that came off of the spare rib. So that's how you take a spare rib and trim it, remove the rib tips, trim it into a St. Louis cut. So I hope you guys found that useful. The next video we do, I hope you guys come back for, because we're gonna cook these bad boys and we're gonna see how they turn out. All right, you guys, so that's how you take a spare rib and trim it up to a St. Louis cut rib. That's the difference when you hear someone mention a spare rib or a St. Louis rib. That's the difference in the ribs. The spares have the rib tips attached. The spares have the rib tips attached. The St. Louis cut does not. I hope you guys found that useful. I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.